Welcome to 284 Media's Just for the Record. I am Jhaka Wooding, and today I am joined by Virgin Islands Party candidate for District 3, Mr. Kevin O.J. Smith. We get into discussions with him after a quick commercial break.
Stay tuned for more Just for the Record right after this.
Rashford made it. Manchester United have come from behind to lead.
At home or on the go, watch CCT Live. Download our app and carry your favorite TV shows, news, or live sports anywhere you go. Visit cctbvi.com/live, select your package, and tune in.
Welcome back. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with us. And of course, Mr. Smith, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right, now we're going to talk everything about your bid in this election and your vision for the Virgin Islands. So let's start off with you walking us through your academic training and your professional career.
So when I graduated high school from the BVI High School in 1988, I first went to work at First Pennsylvania Bank as a teller. I joined the U.S. military in 1989. So for just about 3 years, came back to the Virgin Islands, began working at Scotiabank, left there, went to the University of the Virgin Islands, graduated in 1995, summa cum laude, top 6 out of 200. Before I came back to the Virgin Islands, I worked at a hedge fund in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and then I came back to the BVI, worked at a trust company as an account manager, and then I left the trust company and went to work at the post office at the Postmaster General. Contested the election in 2011, worked as an advisor to the then Premier, Dr. Orlando Smith, then also went on to head up trade in the interim, left trade, went to work at Digicel as the Commercial Operations Director, contested the election again in 2015. After 2015, worked as an advisor again with the Ministry of Finance, and after that I worked at the TRC, and following the TRC I worked as the CEO at Digicel, and after that advisor to the Premier. All
right, you did mention that you have contested an election previously. Yes. I'm just wondering, what was your reason for getting into politics in the first place?
Before that, let me just clarify, I have a bachelor's in finance and worked on a master's in economics. Getting into election. So my mom, Beverly Hart Smith, was the private secretary to Honorable H.L. Stokes. I grew up as a boy, accompanying her whenever she would go, and any kind of work-related stuff with Mr. Stout. After high school, I had to go to her office, which was down in Main Street, the Chief Minister's office, which is above the old post office. And I spent a lot of time around Mr. Stout. And he had a big influence in me. If you check my graduation picture from 1988 at the BVI High School, it says that my career path was either a basketball player or politician. So I've had an interest in politics from a very young age. I've been around it from a very young age.
All right, thank you for your response. And of course, in this general election, it's the first time that you will be contesting on a VIP ticket. So what inspired your new alignment with the VIP?
First of all, I don't think it's a new alignment per se. Most of the households when I was growing up in the 70s were aligned with the Virgin Islands Party at the time. Honorable Alva Sales, for example, my uncle Darius Hodge worked closely with him. So I was always in and around the Virgin Islands Party. In 2011, when I contested the election, Honorable Fraser was a Virgin Islands Party candidate at the time. So obviously, there was no slot for me within the Virgin Islands Party. So for me, it's not necessarily a decision to change or switch. I think I've always pretty much held the same ideals that the Virgin Islands Party holds, which is, if we're going to build a country, we start by building the people first.
All right, but what's your encouragement to keep pursuing a career in politics, given your lack of success in previous elections?
I don't think I don't look at life as lack of successes, right? Life doesn't, or growth doesn't follow a straight line. Right? If you look at the rhythm of your heartbeat, it's up and down, right? You look at the mountain ranges, you have peaks and valleys. So I think every experience you go through is a learning experience. It doesn't change the fact that the goal has become that goal isn't attainable. The goal is always attainable. You just have to keep pursuing it. If something is what you believe in, if you're passionate about something, and the cause is great enough, you continue until you're successful.
All right. Now, given your portfolio, as you would have explained earlier on, you seem to have had success in the private sector. You did mention working at telecommunications companies and hedge funds and several other areas. What interests you about transitioning into public office full-time?
Public office is not separate from private office or from the private sector, right? A lot of the private sector does a lot of business with government. And if you're going to be in government, you need to be able to understand that environment. Because a lot of times when the private sector comes to engage government in business, we're not always up to speed on what's happening in the private sector. My experience in the private sector, and because I've not only had private sector experience, I've had experience in leadership in public sector. When I look at my experience in both realms, it allows me to be more effective as a politician or a leader of a country. So, leader of a district, any realm in public life. I don't see the two as separate, because when you are a public servant or you're a politician, your goal is to serve the public. And part of that public is making sure the economy runs well.
All right, so you have highlighted ensuring that the economy runs well, and you did mention that you have a background in financial services. So I'm wondering, how do you intend to apply that should you be elected?
I've been, not even before I was elected, working as a special advisor with the Premier. I've had a lot of engagement with the Economic Advisory Committee, who has been making recommendations to government on a number of matters in relation to financial services, matters in relation to the economy, matters in relation to government finances. These areas are comfortable areas for me. I'm very familiar with the background of the information, and I think my contribution is one of experience.
And are there any specific areas that you believe you would like to tackle should you become a member of the House of Assembly?
So, working with the Premier's office, I've been involved in some level of reviewing the Sustainable Development Plan. As a matter of fact, many of the programs and plans in a lot of the candidates' proposals are based on the Sustainable Development Plan. You would recall that the World Nationalist Party is a government that publishes the Sustainable Development Plan. We haven't mentioned it up until this point, but I think from here on out we'll be mentioning that a lot of our plans that we plan to implement are based on that. So I've worked on a number of economic issues when we were trying to restart the economy after COVID-19. I worked with the people at the Total Repair Pact to bring back cruise tourism in the BVI. So anything that is economy related, finance related, financial services, I have exposure in, and I think I'll lend a great deal of assistance to the government.
All right, and what about your views in terms of contributing to developing the telecommunications sector?
Well, my views are strong and plentiful, to be quite honest. So the Sustainable Development Plan makes reference to two areas that I'm passionate about. The blue economy is one, the other is telecommunications. It specifically references the National ICT Strategy. I was at the TRC when the strategy was being developed. I had some strong comments at the time when the strategy was being developed. I think the strategy overly focused on the availability of broadband technology. But one of the things we needed to see was what are the particular technologies that enable economies to develop. That's one. And two, of those technologies, what technologies does the BVI have in play? And where is the gap between what we need to have and what we currently have? And that should have been included in the strategy. Another issue is if we're going to make sure that people have effective technology when it comes to telecommunications, we need to make an amendment to the legislation. In telecommunications, we have I don't want to call it a technique, but a principle called network management, which allows us to manage the way traffic goes across our network. I want to make sure that each person in the BVI has equal access to the technology at fair pricing. And part of doing that is making sure that we have a broadband policy that establishes what the minimum speeds a person should have. The rule I was trying to remember is called the net neutrality rule, right? Okay. So net neutrality, you have this rule in the US, you have this rule in the UK, it's in Europe. Net neutrality basically says that every customer in a country must have equal access to the internet, right? At the same affordable pricing. Network management sort of manipulates that a bit because BVI doesn't have a net neutrality rule.
All right, now let's zone into the 3rd district.
Okay.
What are your views in terms of issues that have endured in the 3rd district, and what would you like to see done there under your leadership?
Stay tuned for more Just for the Record after these messages.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I got here. My name is Kamal Haynes. Most of you know me from 284 News, but now you get to see me in a different light on my very own show called Health is Wealth. We have Joel Turnbull,
I don't want you to arch your back when you're pulling down.
Milton McLean,
First of all, right, your footwork.
Stephen Payne,
That was a 9 out of 10. I know you got the service down pat.
Steve Augustine,
You did a pretty hard workout today, so
And
perhaps
as you can see, it's actually
you're
impacting
feeling
me.
it.
Alonzo Boynes,
Taekwondo.
Adam Murrows,
I'll speak as if you're an absolute beginner.
I am an absolute.
You are an absolute beginner.
and Seth Graham.
It bites.
It will
Get your water, get your fruits and veggies, and experience a wealth of knowledge about getting healthy.
There goes my new car. Guess I'm back on my bike.
Your bike? CG offers new car replacement. Remember my monster truck days? Well, one night I attempted a 50-foot pogo double backflip. I landed it and went to karaoke. It wasn't until afterward that my car got hit by that fisherman. He gave me some great mahi-mahi though. Anyway, they paid fast and got me in a new car. Now call a cab. I want you to meet my alpaca guy.
New car replacement for the first year of ownership. CG Insurance. Good like that.
Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us.
All right, now let's zone into the 3rd district.
Okay.
What are your views in terms of issues that have endured in the 3rd district, and what would you like to see done there under your leadership?
Well, I had my lunch on Wednesday, and I think I was quite direct about what I think needs to happen in the 3rd district. I think the 3rd district is a beautiful place, that's one, and maybe I'm biased because I'm from there, because I was raised there. It's right on the outskirts of town, is the next logical place for development. But to ensure that we develop properly, we have to first clean up the place. We have a lot of derelict vehicles in the 3rd. We have a lot of issues down at Parkwood Pond that needs to be resolved. The stockpile of derelict vehicles, the open burning, the road infrastructure is poor. I want to see that corrected. I want to make sure that the authorities participate in any of the economic growth that comes into the BVI, because the government has been driving access to the BVI by air and access to the BVI by sea. We're going to be having more cruise ships coming in. We're going to have these direct flights coming soon. So if we're going to make sure that we have all participation in the economic development, we need to have some facilities in the 3rd district. They need to be cleaned up. The restoration of a historical site. We want to support any business that we have, any aspiring business persons that have ideas. We want to support those. And again, I've said that a lot of my plans are based on the National Sustainable Development Plan. I'm a big believer that technology does drive innovation, does help to drive innovation, and does help to diversify the economy so where a greater number of persons can benefit. So I want to introduce all those things in the 3rd district. And like I've said in my, I didn't say I mentioned in my speech as much, but in my brochure, I definitely covered that I have worked with engineers from around the world, not just in the BVI, in India, China, wherever they may be found. And there are very cost-effective ways to deploy some of those technologies in underground to help our people and make sure that they get the maximum exposure to be the best that they can be.
All right, now I want to zone in a bit on the Parkwood Pond situation. Of course, we've seen a lot of people express concerns about that issue and the health complications we're seeing in the 3rd district, the 2nd district, and the 1st district that people believe to be linked to that issue. What's your views on that area?
No, I have personally been affected by the open burning at Parkwood Pond. So I know how those persons feel. I was concerned for my kids, to be quite honest. And it's one of the discussions I've had with my teammates within the Virgin Islands Party that this is an issue we must get resolved. the former Minister of Health, Honorable Kevin Malone, has been on record in terms of some of the solutions that he had proposed to remedy the situation. For some reason, those proposals have not gone forward, but absolutely, I want to take some of those, look at those proposals and take some of those measures forward as a matter of priority. Because the health of your people should be a paramount concern, right? Before or in line with education.
All right, thank you so much for your response. At this time, some say there's an international microscope on the Virgin Islands. I mean, persons are looking at each other more critically, especially with all the information coming out as it relates to the implementation of the COI recommendations. So there's a greater call for good governance and transparency. Why should Virgin Islanders trust you to deliver in those areas?
Well, for one, I've always handled any profession that I've had with integrity. I've always been effective as a leader. I am very rigid when it comes to standing for form principles. I gained those from two places. One, they are bringing from my parents, and the community in the 3rd District was very strict when I was growing up as a boy. And had it not been for that community-based concept of raising a child, I could have gotten caught up in many things. And then second half of that, my discipline in the military. For example, when I was in the service, if you wrote a bounce check, you could go to jail, because in that world it's fraud. And we have a definition that we use for integrity. Integrity for us means being ethically and morally honest when it comes to all matters at the most micro level. So we believe that we take care of the small things. If we have integrity and we're ethical about small things, we will have integrity and be ethical about big things. This is the reason why we had to shine our boots, we had to make our beds, we had to do a number of small things to make sure that we were effective and true to the larger thing that we had to do at our jobs. So I think the Virginians can trust me because I've always been a disciplined person when it comes to the jobs I carry out. I've always been ethical in the things I do. I've always had integrity. And I don't believe in bending the rules.
All right, now let's continue in line with the COI recommendations. Do you believe that the findings of the COI report were a fair representation of what has gone on in the Virgin Islands in recent years?
I have always thought when I ran from 2011 that there were a number of things we needed to do better, right? There are a lot of things that's wrong with the system. I think the COI is a decent start. I don't think it touches upon a number of the deficiencies, and I don't want to point fingers at where some of those deficiencies are and whether the COI is unfair or fair. I think it's a good start, to be quite honest. But I do think that there's something that needs to be looked at. For example, the role that technical officers play in making sure that systems work the way they should and give the most transparency to the public and make sure that people are getting the best opportunity from government. So yes, on the one hand, there's some things that need to be corrected at the political level, but there are also things that need to be corrected at the technical level.
All right, and in what way do you believe that your expertise, your experience will be of value to the continued implementation of the recommendations should you be elected?
Well, I have a firm knowledge of how the civil service works. I was a civil servant myself as a department head, and before I ran in 2011, I was actually recommended to become a permanent secretary, which I ultimately decided to become to run for office. Because I personally feel like I could make a greater impact as a member of the House of Assembly. I've looked at the COI recommendations. I've looked at the implementation plan for the COI recommendations. I think I can lend a lot of assistance because I am versatile in many areas. And I have a firm knowledge of how the civil service should work and how it should function.
All right, thank you so much for your response. In terms of being a member of the House of Assembly, should your party be elected, that will also open you an opportunity to be a member of the cabinet. Is there any preferred ministry that you would be going for?
Well, I'll be happy to serve at any of the ministries. I think all the ministries are important. I do think natural resources and labor is of vital importance, and the reason why I'm saying natural resources and labor is important is one, obviously because of our natural resources. And I mentioned before in the Sustainable Development Plan, I read the UNDP's Blue Economy Report. I agree with most of the findings there. I can't remember what year that report was published, but the National Sustainable Development Plan referred to it. I think that the blue economy could have gone a bit further than it has. We have a number of assets on our waters, and there's something that people don't traditionally consider assets. So take, for example, an asset generally by definition is anything that you possess that enables you to generate a return. So from a BVI economy standpoint, when we look at our water, obviously the charter industry. So when we look above the water line, our charter industry is obviously one. Willie T is one, whether people like to believe it or not. And then we need to have an assessment of what we have below the water line, right? What is our inventory below the water line? What does our sea life look like? Not just in terms of the type of sea life, but the quantity. Is there an opportunity with that aquatic life that we can create new industries from? Maybe deep sea fishing. It remains to be seen, but it has to be assessed. I don't think we've gone far enough in doing any sort of assessment, but that's something I would like to see. My grandfather was a fisherman on both sides. My father was a fisherman for most of his life. I'm the first generation in my family to not become a fisherman. But I think that on natural resources is one of our greatest assets, particularly out there on the waters. And then the other thing is labor. In business, labor is one of the factors of production, right? If you want to produce something, whether it be a good or service, you need labor resources. So when all labor processes are not as efficient, and I'm not saying what level of efficiency they're at, because I'm not in the Ministry of Natural Resources and Labor. I haven't had a chance to review it, but if I were in that ministry, that would be one of the things I would fully overhaul. And two, when I look at government's use of technology, so I've sat on the steering committee for digital transformation, an area that I'm thoroughly familiar with and experienced with. I've seen government make a lot of mistakes with the implementation of technology, right? Technology has the ability to transform what we do, but it's only as good as the inputs you put into it. So before you go down the technological road, you want to make sure that your processes, your operational processes are fine-tuned and streamlined. So I think natural resources and labor is one ministry that I would be interested in, if I had to pick one.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, when people think of labor, the average person thinks a lot about the employees. Mm-hmm. And one very topical issue in the BVI right now is minimum wage. Persons believe that there needs to be an adjustment in that regard. What are your views on minimum wage?
My view on minimum wage is I think people are trying to address a symptom and not take a holistic look, because as I mentioned before, labor is a factor of production, right? I believe that minimum wages needs to be addressed, yes. I think the overall economy as a whole needs to be addressed, and it needs to be looked at sector by sector. For example, if somebody makes the argument that if you raise minimum wages, it'll put upward pressure on prices. That is possible. But it's also possible that prices may not be fair to begin with. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that when you're tackling minimum wage, you're actually looking at the way businesses set prices. Some of those prices may be affected by external factors. I mentioned in my speech, for example, the cost of eggs. The cost of eggs was being driven up by an illness that happened to the egg-laying population of chickens prior to Thanksgiving. And you had a situation where the supply of eggs went down, but the demand for eggs went up, so prices went up. But I think minimum wage needs to be looked at, but it shouldn't be looked at in a vacuum. That's ultimately what I would say. You want to look holistically at the issue of minimum wage, but you want to look at the issues surrounding how businesses do what they do and what's happening in the sectors.
Okay, so let's just delve into that a bit more. How about we look at the cost of living in the BVI?
Yeah, and yes, that is a similar issue, right? I don't think, I'm one of those persons, I'm a very data-driven person. I don't make opinions about anything unless I have the ability to look at the data and analyze the data. One of the BVI's biggest problem is we don't collect nowhere near enough data that allows government to make proper decisions. That's something that has to change. When I was at trade, I had a discussion with the CSO who, we were in agreement that part of the renewal of licenses should consider collecting certain statistical information from various businesses. Because we have to understand what's driving the cost of living, what's driving the cost of rent, what's driving the cost of transportation, what's driving the cost of food. It's easy to speculate, and I could sit here and speculate about a number of things, but I think the first step is to get under the hood. I'm a big believer in having an economic unit whose job it is solely to just analyze the industry, gather information, analyze the industries, analyze the economy, and present information to the Minister of Finance and Premier, the Cabinet, and the Ministry of Finance, so that we could look at how can we use, I'm trying not to use jargon, right? Okay. So I just say, how do we use, so we refer to as fiscal policy, but how do we use all policies to do some easing in the marketplace so that people don't feel the burden of some of these issues? Some of them could be corrected in the short term. Some may take a longer term to fix. But like I said, without the actual data and information, it's hard to say.
All right. Now, into the next administration, what do you believe is that number one issue that should probably be addressed immediately upon taking office?
Stay tuned for more Just for the Record after these messages.
Today, I am doing cobble treatments with Beyond the Reef. Today, we are doing shark research. So today, we are doing whale research with Beyond the Reef. And wherever I go, I take CCT with me because my life is unlimited.
Yo, everything good, Dad?
Why? This thing got me one way, Daddy.
What you mean?
Ever since I hook up with this thing, can't eat, I can't sleep. This is the first thing I touch it when I reach home.
What you really? Hey, this ain't like you, know.
Dad, this thing got me staying home, keeping out of trouble me.
Wow. What your name is?
She? I talking about my CCT life.
Don't worry about missing your favorite series, sports, news, and local programming. Come to CCT today and sign up for CCT Live to access over 80 channels. CCT Live. Bring it home.
1 month free trial turn into 5. 5 months turn into, well, you know I hot. I watching ball. I been watching football. Dad, Nickelodeon, Paw Patrol. I am hooked. Hook, I tell you.
Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us.
Continue with the reforms. But when I say reforms, I'm just talking about the COI recommendations. There are a lot of other reforms that we need to look at. We need to look at how do we make government more efficient, more productive, so that people have a much easier time of doing business with government. Everybody knows what to expect, what the procedure is. You'll be surprised that we have a number of legislations that are written, but we don't have any regulations written, any supporting regulations written around any of those legislations. So the average person, if you pick up a law book, you go to a government department, you're not clear on what to expect, and sometimes it seems like the rule for one thing changes one day to the next. That has to change. So I'm a big believer in reforms. I'm a big believer in getting the economy moving in the right direction. I believe it's already moving in the right direction. But we have to ask the question, what else needs to change? And again, it goes back to doing some analysis on the economy. We have a number of talented people inside government that I already know do a lot of good work, but we need to create a system to allow them to be more effective. So my first priority, yes, continue the reforms, and 2, economic development.
All right, now you use the word legislation, and right now the BVI is in a bit of a legal battle as it relates to present legislation on same-sex marriage. So much so that Premier Dr. the Honorable Natalia Wheatley says that the territory should proceed with its very first referendum to have the people have their say in that regard. So I just want to know, what are your views on same-sex marriage, and do you believe that a referendum is the right way to go?
My personal views, is I believe in what the Bible teaches fundamentally. But for civil society, I also believe that people have a right to choose how they want to live, as long as it doesn't affect the lifestyle of others, or negatively impact society. I agree with Dr. Natalia Wheatley that when it comes to matters like same-sex marriage, there needs to be a referendum, because in a democracy, we have to decide democratically how we want to proceed as a society. It's not up to me as a politician or a premier or a group of politicians to decide independently. I think that has to go to the public and let the public decide.
All right. Do you believe that there should be a similar approach to the issue of a cannabis industry, or more so a medical cannabis industry, or the issue of a national lottery?
Here's the thing with cannabis, right? Cannabis, the world over, medicinal cannabis, the world over, has become a global industry, right? I think the jury's out that, you know, cannabis is not the medicinal marijuana, more specifically, is not the big bad herb that it was once portrayed to be. Certainly not as bad as tobacco. But I don't think there needs to be a referendum about medicinal cannabis. You know, we have medicinal cannabis in the UK. You know, and if we have this relationship with the UK, if things are happening already in the UK, I don't see an issue with it happening here in the BVI.
All right, and what about the issue of gambling, national lottery?
Well, we're gambling all the time here anyway. I listened to the former premier's comments in the House when they were passing the gaming bill. Anybody who's been around in our communities know that people in the BVI have been participating in gaming, right? Whether it be you're purchasing a lottery ticket from the Puerto Rico Lottery, or you're playing numbers at what they call banker at the various locations, hair salon, bars, etc. For me personally, it's neither here nor there, but I think that as an industry, there is some benefit to it. If you look at horse racing, for example, why shouldn't we have parameter betting at the horse track? There is no evidence to show that if you have gambling in a society, necessarily that the society is going to go away. 47% of all persons in the UK gamble. 47%, that's a high number. And I don't see an issue with gaming in the BVI. Like I said, it's happening right now. The issue is that, one of the other issues is that when you're being evaluated as a territory, let's say FATF or some other organization, because you have gambling on the ground, it behooves you to have an institution that regulates gambling, right? To make sure that we're not crossing the lines with anti-money laundering in particular.
All right, now let's take a step to the issue of crime. What is your view on the current situation of crime in the BVI, and how do you believe that a upcoming administration should move forward with tackling it?
I think all of us are disheartened with a particular level of crime when it comes to the murder of our young men, the loss of life of our young men. I think that is tragic. Some of these persons who lost their lives were family members of mine, so I know how the community feels. 2 cousins and a nephew lost their lives to crime. So I feel the community's pain. I do think that we need to do more about crime, but more in particular, we're trying to address the outpouring of crime. I think what we need to do is have more engagement with young persons before it gets to that point, because we're trying to put a band-aid on a problem that has started from something else way before. And so I think as leaders, we need more engagement with those communities, and I think we need to give support to law enforcement to be able to effectively do their job. But yeah, crime is something that is close to my heart, and how would we prevent the loss of innocent life, and how do we prevent the loss of life in general, and the sense of bloodshed.
All right. Now, in terms of that issue, you did mention that there needs to be more engagement with the youth. In what ways would you like to see legislators proceed with that?
First of all, you got to proceed honestly, right? People in the community in general don't like pretenders, don't like dishonesty, and if you're not going to be genuine with persons, you're not going to gain their trust. They're not going to talk to you. They're not going to open up about what their issues are. I had a lot of intervention in my life at various levels. My mother mentioned some of them when she was introducing me at my lunch. I could have very well gone the other way, and as a matter of fact, there was a close friend of mine, I'm not going to mention his name. He came from a stable environment when we were growing up, and he said to me, he will know who I'm talking about because we lived handles at the time. He said to me, if there's any person that should not have ended up where I ended up in the village, is me. Because I was a bit rambunctious when I was younger. But I think that you have people have to get the sense that you genuinely are concerned about their situation. You're genuinely concerned about where their life is going. I don't think there's enough intervention. There's not enough conversation except to say hi, or maybe when there's a problem to try to resolve it, and then you go about your business. I think people have to genuinely care about what's happening with young men. And for me, I like to share with young people about, I was where you're at. And sometimes when I share some of my stories, some people don't, it's difficult for some people to believe that I was where they were at. I'll put it that way. So, yeah, I do think that government officials need to pay more attention to their style of leadership in these communities, but to be genuine and to be honest.
Right. Also, in terms of young people across the Caribbean, across the world, we see a lot of countries having an issue with getting young people out to vote because they say, whether I vote or not, things might not change. So same issue, right? Mm-hmm. It comes down to, look, a young person is going to deal with you. I'm trying not to say the way I know we say it on the outside, but a young person is going to deal with you if they believe you're genuine, right? If they believe that you're really about doing the things you say, you care about. If you are a person who don't shun them, if you're somebody that can always approach for help, if you're easy to talk to, if you're accessible, if you're willing to try to turn their situation around. I was one of those guys playing on the basketball court in Sea Bay every day. Sometimes we had shoes to play basketball with, played barefoot, right? Sometimes we didn't have net. Sometimes we didn't have a rim. You put up a bucket or you do something, right? So I know what it's like sometimes to be ignored as a youth when people say, the youths are the future, but really and truly, what does that really mean? Mm-hmm. Right? How are we positioning young people to take over from us when the time comes? How are we investing in them? Because I'm a big believer in trying to train people, because I've been a beneficiary of training. And I know the impact and the change I could make. And I think when I started to change was when I honestly believe that people around me actually cared. So if you don't care about their issues, don't expect them to care about yours. Right, fair enough. Now, continuing with administration of the Virgin Islands, there's the major issue of the Ordering Council looming over the territory. What are your views on that issue, and what's your take as a Virgin Islander of the threat of the Constitution being suspended?
To be honest, I am not worried about the Ordering Council. The Ordering Council simply remains there as a precaution in the event that we don't do what we say. We don't continue as promised. We don't reform the way we've agreed to, right? I don't agree with suspending the Constitution, first and foremost. I think as free people, we have a right to determine the way we want our country to go, but at the same time, I respect the fact that the BVI is still a dependent territory. We are not a sovereign nation, and therefore there are certain legal provisions that we have to abide by. Right? It might be uncomfortable for some, but that's the reality that we live in. But at the end of the day, I'm confident that any administration would want to make sure that we reform the BVI in the right way, not necessarily because the UK wants us to, but because we want to for ourselves. We want to have a better country for ourselves. We want to have a better country for future generations. We want to have a better country so that we can continue to develop and make money. Let's not forget that when we came out of slavery, the UK's position was leave us as a bird sanctuary. So I don't want to see the BVI transform and reform because the UK said that we should. I think it's something we need to do for our own betterment, particularly if we're looking at self-determination sometime down the road. It would behoove us to make sure that we have strong systems in place that allow us to govern ourselves effectively.
All right. Now we're coming to the end of our interview, but I don't think we can end without just plainly asking you, why do you believe that your leadership is what Virgin Islanders need right now?
You know, my campaign song says now is the time. One, you can go to any organization I've ever led and ask the staff who've worked with me what I place first as a priority. It has always been people. No organization moves without people. And if you can't get your people to believe in you, if you can't get your people to feel like you're fair, that they can trust you, they'll never work for you. You see, I'm not a believer in power. I made a statement in my speech that a lot of people believe politicians have this power to just go in and crack a whip. No, it doesn't happen that way, because the people who make government move are the technocrats. And if you don't have respect for the employees that work with you, if you don't have respect for their concerns, if you don't have respect for their challenges, if you don't have respect for what they believe in and their values, you're not going to get anything done. So my first priority, my standard, always throughout every job I've ever had, is to work with people and give people the respect that they deserve. To be fair, to be ethical, to be moral, to be compassionate, and to lead with integrity. I've always done that, and you can ask anybody who's ever worked for me, and they'll tell you the same thing.
All right, thank you so much for your response. And of course, thank you for your time today, Mr. Smith. I really do hope that Virgin Islanders find this information valuable to their experience in the 2023 general election. Again, I'm Jhaka Wooding, and this has been Just for the Record.
Welcome to Just for the Record, a political mini-series where Ronn Grant, Kamal Haynes, and Jhaka Wooding sit down with the territory's present and future leaders contesting in the 2023 elections. We're tired of the same old political talking points, so we're doing something about it. We've reached out to every single candidate to ask them the tough questions. For instance, what's your take on same-sex marriage?
Every single person has the right to private and family life. Everyone has their choice, everyone has their opinion, everyone has their beliefs.
I leave it for the professionals.
You should have the right to decide. I'm not going to tell you you shouldn't do it or anything. It's not for me to do.
Marijuana.
Once it's a medical marijuana, then I have no issues with it at all.
I would support that.
Medicinal cannabis can help us with many of the ailments that our people right now are suffering from.
We have to make sure that whatever industry that we invest in, that the economics of it makes sense.
The cost of living.
We will look at all avenues and all the possibilities to ensure that we look at how we can manage the cost of living in this territory.
Living in the BVI based on that minimum wage, I think it's $6.50. How can a family survive?
It's pretty high. Rent prices are pretty high. Can we do something about the prices that within the supermarkets?
And much more, along with the not-so-serious questions as well.
I did drink a lot of guava berry during the Christmas season.
So tune in for the real story on all the territory's candidates running for office. Just for the Record, starting April 4th, 2023 on all our social media platforms, only on 284 Media.